My dad chose my stepmom's son over me to run our family business. 8 years later they're begging me to return. But I had one demand they never expected. I, a 33-year-old male, used to run my dad's 60-year-old male business after I graduated at 21. I was a finance major, and my dad believed that I had business acumen, which is why he told me that I could take over the business when he retired. My mother passed away when I was 16, and since then, it had been just us. But when I turned 22, my dad told me that he was getting married again and that he'd been seeing a woman for the past 2 years. His second wife also had a son from a previous marriage, but she was divorced, and her ex-husband was still involved in her son's life. My stepbrother, a 30-year-old male, was just 18 and starting out at college when I met him. At first, he seemed to be a nice guy, and we got along well in the beginning, since he was majoring in economics and used to ask me for tips for college occasionally. But once he'd spent a year in college, he came back as a total arrogant jerk and was just annoying to talk to, so I stopped speaking to him altogether. My stepmom obviously didn't see anything wrong with his behavior and continued to baby him, and my dad didn't bother to address the change in his stepson's behavior either. I used to live in the same house and would be around whenever my stepbrother would come back home, and he'd make it a point to put me down or mock me in whatever way that he could. I think it was because he went to a better college than mine, better only because the college he went to was notorious for turning out rich, bratty, and downright annoying people, which is exactly what he was turning into. But I managed to ignore him somehow, and that's the way it was for 2 whole years until my stepbrother graduated and my dad announced to our family that he was going to let his stepson take over the business now so that he could kick back and relax. I wasn't happy with that because he promised me that position earlier. I was also his son by blood and had been working day and night for my father's business. I'd been running my dad's business for the last 3 years anyway when my stepbrother was off at college, so it was natural for me to inherit the business and not him. But my dad felt that my stepbrother had had a better education and would be more capable and competent than I was. He told me that I could work under my brother and handle the finances only, since that was my forte. But I wasn't okay with working for my brother, especially when I'd been working so damn hard to prove myself worthy of being the boss for 4 whole years, even before my dad married my stepmom and my stepbrother came into our lives. He only had the knowledge that he'd gained from college. He had no idea what hands-on experience of running a business was like, unlike me. I tried to explain that to my dad, but he just wasn't ready to listen, and after a few days of arguing, my dad told me that his decision was final and if I wasn't happy with it, then I could pack my things up and leave. So that's exactly what I did. I stayed at a friend's house for a few days after that until I got a job, and once I received my first paycheck, I rented an apartment with 2 other people and worked my way up from there. I still remember very distinctly that my first room was a pale blue that really helped me calm my nerves whenever I'd come back from work frazzled, exhausted, and still hurt over my dad's betrayal. I think that's why I chose to paint my current house's walls the same shade of blue. I now live in a nice little house in the suburbs with a picket fence and my dog, Aussie. I'm a financial consultant at a huge company and lead a lonely but comfortable life. I didn't ever speak to my dad or anyone else from my family after I left, and I've only kept in touch with a handful of my friends. I've had to work really hard, and in the process, I lost touch with a lot of people, but I'm okay with that because that just meant fewer people to remind me of the past. My home, my dad's house, is just a 3-hour drive away from where I live now, but to get where I am now, it took me 8 whole years, so I'm kind of proud of myself for achieving this since I was all on my own and didn't have anyone looking over me. I've never felt the need to speak to my dad again or even forgive him because it's been so long that it just doesn't matter anymore, and I used to think that he'd forgotten about me entirely as well. But that changed around 2 days back when my dad showed up at my house out of the blue. It was the weekend, and I was home as well. I was really shocked to see him here and the change that 8 years had brought in how he looked. He was a shadow of the man that he used to be almost a decade back because now his hair was grayed and had thinned considerably, and he was also a lot more bony and skinnier than I remembered. He told me that he'd asked around for my address, and one of my friends from the past, the one who'd let me stay at his place when I got kicked out, had told him where to find me a few days back when my dad had told him that he wanted to end the feud and reconcile with me. I felt bad for him, so I invited him in, and he told me that my stepbrother had been the one to drive him here and was waiting in the car, so I invited him inside as well, even though I really didn't want to speak to him, but it's common courtesy. My stepbrother also looked worn out and tired, and it was obvious that they'd been through some hard times, judging by their battered car and faded old clothes. Initially, I thought that they were actually here to reconcile and that my dad would ask me to forgive him, but after some small talk, when they came to the point, they blindsided me by saying that they wanted me to rejoin the business or else they'd go bankrupt and were in desperate need of my help. They wanted me to take over once more and save their failing business, which had been declining for the past couple of years. They'd even had to take out a loan and mortgage my mother's jewelry, which she'd left to my dad, to fund themselves so they wouldn't go out of business. My dad said that they'd both tried their best, but it just wasn't working anymore, and they were really close to going completely bankrupt if I didn't step in to help them. Even my stepbrother, who still seemed just as arrogant as he used to be, said that they needed my help and wanted me to take over to save them. So they wanted me to get involved after almost a decade only because they wanted me to prevent their ship from sinking. There was no apology either, and they'd approached me like they were here for a business meeting and not like they owed me an apology for kicking me out when both of them knew very well that I was the rightful heir of my dad's business. I was meeting them after 8 whole years, and they were totally businesslike in their demeanor, which was fine, but they definitely owed me an apology at the very least. I approached the conversation with them in the same professional manner I would adopt for any external business associate seeking my assistance. I explained that I could only consider lending a hand if they were prepared to compensate me with a salary exceeding my current earnings at my firm, a condition I was fully aware they couldn't meet, given their dire financial straits and the fact that they were on the brink of bankruptcy without my intervention. It was clear from the outset that they had no capacity to offer any form of payment whatsoever. My father appeared genuinely stunned by this, his face registering shock as he reiterated what we all knew: they simply couldn't afford to pay me, and moreover, it hadn't even crossed their minds that I would demand compensation, considering our familial ties. He emphasized that as his biological son, I had an inherent obligation to step in and support the family without expecting anything in return. However, I stood my ground, pointing out that I had built a stable and rewarding career where I earned a substantial income, allowing me to live independently and on my own terms. It struck me as profoundly unjust for them to assume I would abandon the security and satisfaction of my present life merely to rescue them from their self-inflicted predicament, especially since they had made no effort to maintain contact over the past 8 years or show any concern for my well-being during that time. I reminded them that just as I had never anticipated or demanded their help during my own periods of hardship after leaving home, they shouldn't presume entitlement to mine now. In my view, this stance was entirely equitable and reasonable under the circumstances. To drive the point home, I specified that the sole prerequisite for my return would be an offer of double my current salary, a figure I knew was utterly unattainable for them in their current state. I had braced myself for a heated debate or perhaps even an attempt on their part to coerce me into compliance, envisioning arguments laced with emotional appeals or outright pressure. But what unfolded instead caught me completely off guard. My father, usually the epitome of composure, crumbled right there before my eyes. Tears streamed down his face in a way I'd never witnessed before. Even during the somber days of my mother's funeral, he had maintained a dignified restraint, holding back any overt displays of grief. Throughout my life, he had embodied stoicism, rarely showing vulnerability, which made this raw outpouring all the more jarring and left me feeling like the lowest form of scum. Compounding the discomfort, my stepbrother chimed in unhelpfully, his tone dripping with disappointment as he claimed they had held higher hopes for me, that I would rise to the occasion as a dutiful son and fulfill what he saw as my familial duty. According to him, my refusal was a profound letdown. They departed shortly after, the atmosphere thick with unresolved tension. As they headed out, my stepbrother paused to add that the door remained open for my return, but he admonished me sternly, insisting that my words had been inappropriate and hurtful. He went so far as to say I owed our father a sincere apology for what he perceived as my blatant disrespect and self-centeredness. My dad, meanwhile, offered no further commentary. He simply dried his eyes, composed himself as best he could, and exited without so much as a farewell, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Now, 2 days have passed since that fraught encounter, and I'm left grappling with uncertainty about how to navigate this emotional quagmire. In the moment, my aim wasn't to deliberately demean or wound them, particularly not my father, yet in hindsight, I'm questioning my actions deeply. The aftermath hasn't brought the sense of vindication or closure I might have subconsciously hoped for. Instead, it's left me with a gnawing unease and a profound regret over my approach. The image of my dad's breakdown haunts me, stirring up guilt that perhaps I do need to extend an olive branch and apologize, acknowledging that while I sought some measure of retribution for past wrongs, I may have inflicted unnecessary pain on him. My emotions are in turmoil. I truly don't know how to process this or what path to take next. Could you offer some guidance? Am I truly the asshole here for insisting on double my current pay as a condition for resuming control of the business, fully aware that it's beyond their means? Reflecting further on that pivotal meeting, I can't help but replay the subtle nuances, the way my father's shoulders slumped as he absorbed my words, or the faint tremble in his voice when he invoked family loyalty. It was as if the weight of years of poor decisions finally bore down on him all at once. My stepbrother's arrogance, though tempered by exhaustion, still peeked through in his judgmental remarks, reminding me of the old resentments that had driven me away initially. Yet, amid the confrontation, I also felt a flicker of my own unresolved anger bubbling up, fueled by memories of being sidelined despite my dedication. Expanding on my reasoning, I elaborated during the talk about how my current role not only provided financial stability but also personal fulfillment, with opportunities for growth that the family business, in its crumbling state, could never match. I described the solitude of my suburban life, with its simple pleasures like walks with Aussie under the pale blue skies that mirrored my first apartment's calming walls, underscoring how far I'd come without their support. This wasn't just about money, it was about equity, about not being taken for granted after being discarded. Still, witnessing my father's uncharacteristic vulnerability pierce through my defenses, making me wonder if compassion should override justice. The lack of any remorse from their side, no admission of fault, no recognition of the years I'd lost, only deepened the divide, yet his tears humanized him in a way that complicated my resolve. Perhaps there's a middle ground, like offering advice from afar without fully re-engaging, but the guilt lingers, prompting me to seek outside perspectives on whether my demand crossed into cruelty or remained a fair boundary. In the end, this episode has reopened old wounds, forcing me to confront not just their failures, but my own capacity for forgiveness, or the lack thereof, in the face of lingering betrayal. I feel the same way now since I thought about it, and I realized that I was just being too emotional because my dad had ended up crying. A few days after that, I thought about the 8 years that I'd spent without my dad and the amount of tears I cried during that time because I literally felt like I had nobody. My mom was gone, she passed away after a massive heart attack, and my dad preferred his new family, new wife, and son over me. A few of my friends did keep me company and boost my morale, but even they had their own struggles and hardships, so it's not like they could provide the same emotional support that my family could have. I'm glad I'm still in touch with some of them though because they really did help me to the best of their abilities, but still, I could always feel the void that my parents left. Thinking about all of that really put my dad's tears into perspective and made me realize how unfair it all was. My stepbrother even had the guts to tell me that I needed to step up and help and also apologize after what they'd put me through. None of them had thought to reach out to me and get me to come back even once after I'd left. None of them bothered to find out whether I was even alive or not until it was them who needed my help, and then they came running to me and expected me to just help them without as much as an apology. Truth be told, I might have even considered helping them out and taking over their failing business had they at least acknowledged their mistake and apologized for it. They just needed to admit that they'd messed up, and then I probably would have offered to help them out myself. They wouldn't even have had to ask. I'm not a very cold person. I like to think of myself as a forgiving human being, but even I can't forgive someone who's not even sorry, and they pissed me off by playing the family card because why was that not something they considered when they were kicking me out of the business and their home? They didn't stop to think that I was a part of this family and that maybe I deserved to be part of the business that I'd helped run for a couple of years, had more experience than my stepbrother, and no college degree can buy you that, that's for sure. If it hadn't been for my stepbrother's dad, he probably wouldn't even have been able to attend that college, and we would have been on the same boat then. My stepmom's last husband and my stepbrother's biological dad is a relatively rich guy and could afford to send him to a better college than the one I went to, and for my dad to use that against me back then was absolutely unfair. He could have sent me to a better college, but he chose not to because the one I went to would teach me all I needed to learn anyway, and he didn't want to waste money on more tuition when eventually I'd just be taking over the family business. He was the one who made the decision for me and then used it against me when it was convenient for him, which is what hurt me the most. So no, I don't believe that I owe him an apology anymore, and if they contact me again, then I'll tell them once and for all that I'm not interested in coming back. I've built a life for myself far away from them now, and that's the one I'm going to choose. My stepbrother texted me today to ask if I had given any thought to their offer, and I told him that I wasn't coming back, so thanks but no thanks. I'd already blocked them all a few years after I'd left, but I hadn't changed my number since then, so they knew how to find me if they wanted to. My stepbrother had probably changed his number, which is how he'd been able to text me. He wasn't happy with my response and decided to call me up several times, but because I was at work, I wasn't able to respond. This happened in the morning, and once I was done with work, I decided to block his new number as well on my way back home, but that turned out to be kind of pointless because once I got back home, I noticed my dad's car parked right outside my house. I was really annoyed to see that, and when I was about to do it, I heard my stepbrother call out to me, but I pretended not to hear and went inside as fast as I could and then slammed the door shut. I was in no mood to deal with him after work, so even when I heard him knocking on the door and demanding that I let him in, I said that I wasn't interested in talking to him and that he needed to leave right away if he didn't want me calling the police to escort him out. And then it was the usual. He started accusing me of being selfish and said that I was being cruel on purpose just because Dad had chosen to let him take over almost a decade back, and now I was bitter and vengeful, which is why I was refusing to help them. I didn't even try to justify myself and agreed, then asked him to leave again or else I really would report him, and that's when he finally left after letting out a string of expletives against me as if that would make me feel bad. I'm thinking about tightening the security around this place because it's not that bad for them to mess with me, but I absolutely can't let them mess with Aussie. Okay, so I had to take a day off of work today because of what happened yesterday and everything that I got to know about my family. All I can say is my dad is a seriously messed up person, and I have no idea why he would confess the things he did yesterday. I received an email from my dad last night, and I wasn't expecting that at all because the last time I'd heard from them was when my stepbrother had shown up at my place almost 2 weeks ago. Since then, they had neither texted nor called me anymore, so I'd assumed that they'd given up trying to get me back, and even I'd sort of forgotten about it because I was really busy with work. His email was really long, so I thought I'd read it later, but he sent another email within seconds to tell me that I needed to read the first one as soon as possible if I wanted to know the truth about why he'd made my stepbrother his successor and not me. That piqued my interest, so I ended up reading that email last night, and I honestly just don't know what to make of it. He told me that he hadn't met my stepmom after my mother's death like he told me initially, but in fact, he'd known her for a long time, and they'd been together for several years before my mom passed away, so he'd been cheating on my mom for a long time. My stepmom divorced her husband a year after my mom's death, and eventually my dad told me about their relationship and made it seem like they'd been together for just a short while. I've got to admit they hid it really well. He told me that my stepbrother had known about their extramarital affair and had kept it secret for them for the longest time, but once he graduated from college, he told my dad and his stepmom that he wanted to take over my dad's business. My dad had suggested that he and I partner up and run it together, but he wasn't okay with that and wanted to be the only boss. He tried to negotiate with my stepbrother to the best of his abilities because of the promise he'd made to me earlier, but my stepbrother just wasn't ready to listen. Eventually, he brought out the big guns and told my dad and his stepmom that they could either make him the successor who would inherit the lucrative business or else he'd tell his dad about his mother's affair, and that would put an end to the alimony payments. His dad was the head of surgery at a hospital, and that was not a position that he could just inherit. He'd have to study for it and work to get there, which is why he preferred my dad's business, which was something he could get with persuasion and blackmail. So my dad had no choice but to let him take over the business because my stepmom couldn't give up the alimony. She believed that the money from the alimony payments would help in the future in case they ever needed money, but now when they really did need money to fund their business and save it from sinking, she was refusing to lend a helping hand and was holding on to all the wealth that she'd accumulated over the years. That's why my dad had been forced to mortgage my mother's jewelry. The woman was so damn selfish that even after everything that my dad had done for her and her son, she was refusing to help them because she didn't think it was worth it to save an already failing business and didn't want to lose money, even though her own son had also asked her. She didn't care about anyone but herself, not even her own son, and my dad was realizing it just now. Although I can't say I feel bad for any of them because all of them are just horrible, horrible people. I'm really relieved now that I left this toxic and selfish family behind. My dad asked me to consider coming back now that I knew his reasons behind doing what he did, but if anything, he's just hammered the last nail in his own coffin. There's not a chance in hell that I'll go back to them now that I know the truth. He's been cheating on my mother, and I think now it's just his bad karma catching up to him. So for him to think that I'll actually feel bad for him and come back out of pity is just delusional. I don't know what's going to become of my stepbrother and stepmom, but they're such crappy people that I think they have a really bleak future in store for them too. But yeah, I'm glad that I'm out of here because my dad's last email just made sure that I'll never go back to that family and stay as far away from their mess as I possibly can. I feel like I have a lot of online well-wishers now, so that's nice. I also learned about some of you who are going through similar experiences with your families kicking you out and all. I want to say to you is to hold on, it gets better. Just keep working towards your future and don't give up. My family has left me alone, and since it's been close to a month, I don't think they're going to contact me again. I blocked them all again and haven't bothered to find out what became of them or the business because I'm content with my life now and have no desire to ever think of them again. Now it's just me and Aussie again, like it always has been.